Welcome back. So now we'll proceed to design our ccBPM. The ccBPM will be built within our enterprise service repository. So I'm still within my enterprise service repository. I'm going to right click, say new, and now we will be going into process integration scenario objects, and out here select integration process. I repeat, how do we start building our ccBPM? Right click within your namespace, say new, go into process integration scenario objects and select integration process. Okay, a ccBPM is called integration process technically within the PI layer. So I'm calling it IP underscore file RFC file underscore 00. All right. So make sure you're within integration process, and within, once you've selected, you're within process integration scenario objects, you've selected integration process and say IP file RFC file 00. That's the name. Make sure your namespace is correct and your software component version is also correct, and say create. And once you do that, this is what it looks like. I'm going to pop it out. So we are just looking at this. So first thing, let's go ahead and save. All right, now I've saved my ccBPM. So now you have a start step and a stop step, right? So within the start step and the stop step, and here you see this is a canvas where you define the business process flow, and all the step types that we saw previously, they're all listed here. So if you see, this is a receive step, this is a send step, this is the receiver determination step, this is the transformation step. A receive step, as we all saw previously, is used to receive a message within the ccBPM. A send step is used to send a message out from your ccBPM. A send step can be both synchronous and asynchronous. A receive step is typically the first step of your ccBPM, right? A receiver determination step is used to identify the receiver of a message. A transformation step is used to perform a mapping, right? A user decision is to perform a user decision. We will not be looking at that in detail. A switch step is to do a switch case if you want to do a switch case kind of a thing. A container operation, if you want to perform some kind of container operations, we will be looking at it in the next ccBPM exercise. A control step is whether if you want to throw an exception, deadline, and so on. A block step is like a for loop. You can have a sequence of steps within it that can get executed once or multiple times. Fork is for multiple or parallel processing or branching. Loop is for looping. Wait step is to make it wait. All right. So let's go ahead. First step in your ccBPM always has to be a receive step, right? There's one exception to it, but for now, how does the ccBPM get triggered? You will have to do a receive step, right? You will have to receive the request message from your file system, right? How is the ccBPM going to get triggered? Until and unless this interface doesn't get triggered and you don't get the message into your BPM, your ccBPM will not get triggered. So you need to have a receive step. Just select the receive step here, keep it pressed, drag it and drop it between the start and the stop button. If you try to drag it elsewhere, it will not let you do that. So if you I'm taking the receive step, trying to drag it somewhere in the canvas, it won't. A receive step, all the steps have to be between your start and the stop step. So let's go ahead, drag it between the start and the stop step. You'll see this black orange box that comes up. Excellent, I'm releasing it. Perfect. So now you have a BPM that has a start step, and that's going to be triggered with a receive step. And here you will start seeing the properties of your receive step. So select the receive step, and in the canvas here, you start seeing the properties. So let's give a step name, right? Instead of saying it receive step, I'll say receive file request into ccBPM, right? Next, is it used to start the process? Yes. And it's asking for what is the message that it receives. If I select it, I don't have anything. It is asking me for a container element. Remember, anything in a ccBPM always deals with a container. So save your BPM, and now at the bottom here you will see something called container. Let's go ahead and close this processing log. So then we have multiple space for the container, and I'm just dragging it a little to the top. All right. So now let's create a container. We'll call it a name, receive file request. Okay. Or let's just call it file request, right? We don't need to call it receive. So my first is a file request container. It's asking what is the type. Category will be abstract interface. Remember, it's an interface. So we are saying category is abstract interface, and it will ask you for the type. So what is it? It is the request, right? So abstract asynchronous file request. Similarly, let's define a container element for the file response, because the ccBPM is only dealing with the request and the response, right? and I'm selecting it abstract, and I'm selecting it as perfect. All right, save it. So we've defined two container element. One container element is to get is for file request, and one container element is for file response. Right, now let's go ahead and select our message here. Immediately you will see what are we receiving within this receive step. You are going to receive the file request. So make sure you select file request here and say OK. If you have not defined the container element, you will not be able to see anything here. Once you do that, let's save our ccBPM. So now the receive step is done, right? What is the next step that we are doing? We are now going to get the request from the the BPM is now going to make the synchronous call, right? So that's going to be a send step. So let's drag the send step, because the BPM is sending message out. Drag the send step, and will we place it before the receive step? The answer is no. Make sure you place it after the receive step, because that is the second step where you're going to send a response. So I'm dragging the send step. You cannot drag it anywhere in the canvas. You need to drag it and put it after your receive step, but between the start and the stop. So now once I do it, it's asking me a description again. I'm going to say send synchronous call to RFC, right? Now the mode, is it asynchronous or synchronous? It's a synchronous call, right? So I'm now going to say it's synchronous. Make sure you select the mode as synchronous, and now it's going to ask you for the synchronous interface. Okay, so let's see what comes up. So automatically you're able to see the synchronous interface, abstract, asynchronous, synchronous interface that is coming in. And now it's going to ask you what is the send request message and the response message. The request message is our file request, and the response message is going to be file response. So go here and select the file response and save your scenario. All right, so now we've made a synchronous call to back to the BPM. Next step, now we've gotten the response, so we're now going to send the response out. Again, drag the send step, and when you drag the send step, put it within the send synchronous and the send stop step. Right, I've dragged it, I put the send step here, and now I'm going to call it send response to file. Right, it's an asynchronous, perfect, and then select the message. What is the message going to be? It is the file response. Exactly, right? With that, our ccBPM is done. Right, do not worry, I'm going to do this one more time. I'm going to reject change. I'm not going to activate this. I'm just going to go to the ccBPM and reject it, so we can do this one more time, right? Because it's a little tricky. We will do this one more time. If you've already done it and you're comfortable, you can skip this section, but I'm doing it one more time so that it's much more easier for people who found it a little difficult. All right, so let's go into new, right click, new, select the object type to be process integration scenarios, integration process. Let's give it a name, IP file RFC file _00, right? I've created an integration process. I'm just popping it out, and I'm going to save. All right, now the first step of any ccBPM will be a receive step. So let's go ahead and drag the receive step, right? I'm going to drag this receive step, and you need to make sure you drag it within the start and the stop step. And when you drag it within the start and the stop, you will be seeing the orange curve open and the closing brackets, right? Once you see that, you can drop it, right? Now let's call it receive file request, right? In the properties window here, make sure your receive step is selected, and when your receive step is selected, you will see the properties for the receive step. So I'm going to call the step type receive file request, and let me just drag this a little here, okay? And I'm going to close this processing log. Perfect. So now let's save it. Before we do anything else, we need to define containers. Containers are nothing but in BPM, for you to handle your messages, you need to define container objects, right? So the first container object that we are going to create is the file request container object. So I'm calling the container object file request. The category is going to be abstract interface. Make sure that the category is abstract interface, and the type is going to be our SIAA file request service interface. All right. Next, create another response, file response. Create another container object called file response. Call it again of type abstract, and here we will be selecting our abstract asynchronous file response service interface. All right. Make sure that the request is associated with the request service interface, and the response is associated with the abstract asynchronous response service interface. Save your ccBPM. Let's go back to the file. Make sure you're clicking on the file step, and once you click on the file step, it is going to ask you what is the message. So click on this because it's a mandatory field, and now it will ask you what is the container. Make sure you select file request because the ccBPM is receiving the file request. Save your ccBPM. Okay, my ccBPM is saved. Now let's go ahead and pull the send step, push it and pull it here. Okay, what did I do? I dragged the send step and put it between after the receive step and between the stop step, and let's call it send synchronous call to SAP, right? Make the mode asynchronous. The first thing you have to do is make the mode asynchronous, and once you make the mode asynchronous, it's going to ask you for a synchronous interface. Use the selection help. You should be able to see your abstract synchronous service interface. Make sure it is SIAS abstract synchronous BAPI user get details that we define, right? It's asking what is the request message. The request message is our file request message, and the response message is our file response message. All right, that is done. And then the next step is to send this response back. So drag your send step, and when you drag your send step, push it after the send synchronous step and between the stop step, and place it. And now you see this is the last step that we are going to define. Let's call the send step send file response. Okay, you can call it whatever we want. We called it file response. The direction mode is asynchronous, correct? And let's select the response. What is the response going to be? It's the file response. All right, say OK, save, and with that your ccBPM is done. Okay, let's pop in. Before we do anything, go into integration process and execute the check. All right, there's some error. All right, there's no error. There seems to be some bug here because when I execute the check, typically, let's say, where is the execute? Say check. All right, messages are populated, and it says no semantic errors found. All right, now let's go ahead to our change list and activate our change list. So right click and activate. With that, our changes are activated. All right, the next step is to now configure the integration directory, and we shall do that in our next session. I shall see you there soon.